So how far back does your history of electronic music go? Today we're going to look at some of my favorite picks of all time and discuss the importance of these albums, so stick around. Hello Internet, Chris Cline here with Alma Music Center in San Antonio. It's been a while since I last saw you, about 5 weeks. I've been working on projects and trying to recover from COVID, which is a total bummer. Before we move on, I'd like to ask that you please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And of course, you can find us at almamusic.com on the internet, where you can find all your favorite instruments and strings and bows and whatever you might need to create the musical sounds of your dreams. As I said in the opening, we're going to explore some early electronic recordings today, kind of diving into the history of electronic music, and I want to address or look at 5 records that I find to be very, very important in the history of electronic music. Now, I know that there's far more than 5, and we're not all going to agree on these picks. Opinions and subjectivity are wonderful things, so when we start commenting on the records and our feelings and all these things, let's be very, very civil and address these things in a very nice manner so we can have a really, really healthy conversation about the history of electronic music. So let's go ahead and move forward with my first pick. So the first record that I've chosen today is actually 3 records. It's a 3-volume set, and it was composed and created by Raymond Scott in 1962. Excuse me. These records are called Soothing Sounds for Baby. Here's volume 1. It's 1 to 6 months. Then we have volume 2, 6 to 12 months. And volume 3, 12 to 18 months. Now, 1962, what kind of technology do we have back then? Now, arguably, we can say that electronic music started with maybe the theremin. Back in I'm trying to remember when the first theremin was invented. Late 20s, 1928, I really can't remember. It's hard to juggle all these dates. But, we have the theremin, we have the Martineau. There's other instruments that have existed, but the thing that's unique about these records is, first off, these are considered the first ambient records by many, many music historians. These songs were, once again, composed by Raymond Scott. And Raymond Scott actually became famous composing the kind of a big band jazz type music for different television production houses, film production houses, for jingles. He attended Juilliard. But the thing that's so special about these soothing records is that he created all of his own electronic music or electronic instruments for these records, using primitive oscillators, vacuum tubes, creating early sequencers, filters, using tape tricks. He was meticulous in how he recorded his content, to the point of almost going crazy. He eventually kind of dropped off the map and was forgotten about for quite some time until these albums were reissued. It's a really, really interesting exploration into what electronic music sounded like at the time, and predates a lot of what we would consider ambient music by a little over a decade, when Brian Eno kind of came into the fold after he left Roxy Music and created discrete music and music for airports and all these other seminal albums that came out in the early to mid 70s. But this, for me, is such an amazing starting point, because again, we've created this music, this ambient music, in 1962, and he was really the first person to do it. Soothing Sounds for Babies, volumes 1 through 3, Raymond Scott. Seek them out. They're a lot of fun. And let's move on to number 2, or my number 2 choice. So my number 2 choice is Silver Apples of the Moon by Morton Subotnick. Now, this came out in 1967 on the Nonesuch record label, which is still around today. Nonesuch was very, very well known for classical recordings, experimental recordings, avant-garde 20th century recordings. Just a fantastic label. Again, still around today. That's changed a little more pop Americana, but significant nonetheless in its origins. Now, Silver Apples of the Moon was composed and written by Morton Subotnick on a Buchla synthesizer. And this kind of launched the whole West Coast sound of synthesis. Morton Subotnick was a member of the San Francisco Symphony. He played clarinet and eventually helped start the Electronic Music and Tape Society in San Francisco, and also taught and I believe studied at Mills College in Oakland. I believe both for a while. And of course, Mills College, brought us all kinds of luminaries, especially the Tape Society, the San Francisco Tape Society, with people like Suzanne Ciani and Pauline Oliveros and many others. This is a very bleepy bloopy record where doesn't appear to be any real structure to the musical content, but the exploration of electronics, at least at this point in 1967, had never been recorded at this level. Oddly enough, with this being a West Coast synthesis style record, it was recorded in New York City. And when Morton Subotnick was first approached to record the album by the head of None Such Records, he was offered $500. He declined because he didn't feel like they were going to, A, he didn't trust the labels, and B, they weren't going to accurately represent the content that he was working on. Within a couple of days, the head of None Such Records came back to Morton and offered him $1,000 as opposed to the original $500, which today would be roughly $10,000. So that was his advance, a $10,000 advance in 1967 for one of the first electronic albums to ever be recorded at this level using a Buchla synthesizer. Buchlas are still in production today. The thing that's really unique about a Buchla synthesizer is that it doesn't use a standard keyboard. At least originally it didn't. It used a series of capacitance pads that you could move around on to control voltages. And unlike East Coast synthesis, where a lot of our waveforms have already been, for lack of a better term, developed for us, sawtooth, square wave, so on and so forth, with West Coast or with the Buchla, you're given sine waves and you have to create the waveforms using, once again, additive synthesis by feeding back or folding back the waveforms on each other to get them to distort to create new and unique waveforms. This is a really, really cool record. It's not easy listening, but it is incredibly important, and it certainly went on to influence groups like Autechre and some of the more radical electronic music that exists today that you don't necessarily find a beat or a pulse to. For those of you that are not familiar with Autechre, explore their catalog. A lot of what they do, they build Max MSP. Really, really cool records, but this right here is a great launching point for more freeform electronic music. So number 3 for me is Switched on Bach by Wendy Carlos. Now, if you can see it on your screen, this actually says Walter Carlos. So it should be noted that Walter transitioned in the 70s to Wendy, and all further pressings of this record were credited to Wendy Carlos, as well as everything else that she's done in her lifetime. Such an important person in the history of electronic music, amongst many other women, Daphne Oram, Suzanne Ciani, the list goes on and on. There's so many important women in the history of electronic music and sound design that we should all explore a little more deeper. Lots of great music out there, but let's get back to Switched on Bach. So Switched on Bach was completely composed on a Moog modular synthesizer. Now, the reason that this is so important is that the Moog modular in 1968 could only really produce one note at a time. It was monophonic as well as one timbre. So these rich pieces that you hear, these arrangements, had to be recorded a single pass at a time, playing single notes at a time. Also, when playing the modular Moog, you'd have to remove your finger completely from the keyboard before you press the next key in order to get it to trigger, to get the gate to reset. So the level of artistry, playing, scientific knowledge on synthesis that went into this record is absolutely immeasurable. And I even think today that in many ways it's unparalleled. You can do a lot of this stuff in the box, on your phone, on your iPad, using plugins from Arturia. They have a Moog modular plugin. Moog has plugins, I believe, of the Mini. I don't know that they've done a modular yet. If they have, then it somehow has skipped me because I'm not doing a whole lot of synthesis work in the box these days. But to do this back in 1968 on tape with a synthesizer that's going out of tune constantly and having to adjust the way you play the piano or the keyboard and having to have an understanding of how all these different modules in a Moog modular work to create the different timbres is really quite stunning. This was the second classical album to go platinum, which back in the day that meant 1 million copies. Now when we look at streams, we're like, oh my God, somebody has 275 million streams. Doesn't really mean a whole lot when you're just talking about selling physical copies. And she also received help from Benjamin Folkman on this from a playing standpoint, and Rachel Elkind helped produce it, who I believe helped Wendy produce and maybe even score some of the Shining soundtrack, which for me is still the most horrific soundtrack ever laid down to wax. It creeps me out when I put it on. Sometimes I can't make it through it because I'm afraid I'm going to turn around and 2 twin girls are going to be staring at me in the doorway of my home studio. But the importance of this record, once again, it can't be measured. And if you don't have it or if you haven't heard it, you really need to listen to it immediately. Like, seek it out right now because it's going to blow your mind when you think about how much work it took to do this, when today we could do it in a matter of hours, right? So Switched on Bach, Wendy Carlos. So number 4 for me, once again, it's Tangerine Dreams, Phaedra. Now, this is a band that has released a gazillion records in their 50-year plus history and has had, I don't know how many different personnel changes. So you're probably wondering, well, why is this even important? And I'll tell you why. This is the first record that they used a sequencer on. It was their 5th record. It was also released by Virgin Records, which of course turned into a massive giant powerhouse, not just record label, but corporation led by Richard Branson. And it was the first record that Virgin Records charted on the UK charts. I believe this peaked at actually 15, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, please let me know in the comments down below. Let me have it. I'm good for it. But anyhow, this is a really, really dark, ominous record. It does have a pulse to it. Words escape me on how to really describe this music. It is a part of that Berlin School of Electronic Music or cosmic music, or what do they call Musik komisch. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation because I don't know German, even though I am German. I don't know German. I wish I did. It's a beautiful language. But it's a really fun record to just kind of get lost in. And I'm probably going to go a little too far here, but depending on your state of mind, this record might have the ability to transport you to some other places as well because of its repetitiveness and the way that it grows over time. It is a slow progression, but it's a lot of fun to listen to. It's definitely a wild ride. And again, it's their first foray into using sequencers, which is very important because we really didn't have a whole lot of sequencer use up until this point, at least recorded sequencer use, unless we go back to my first record where Raymond Scott was making his own sequencers. And the sequencer that they used on here, I don't remember what it is. It could have been one of the Moog sequencers or the ARP 2600. This feels more like an ARP record to me. If you have any more information about what instruments were played on this, please share down below. But give it a listen. You can find this on most streaming platforms as well. And last, but certainly not least, is Craftwork's Autobahn. This is an original copy on Vertigo Records. I love this record more than you can possibly ever imagine. Craftwork really shifted their sound with this record. Before this, it was more that school of krautrock, very experimental. And this was experimental at the time as well, but employing more traditional instruments with electronics and lots of effects. But this is where they made this beautiful electronic journey down the Autobahn, and that's what it's supposed to feel like you're taking this trip on this famed German highway. And they went as far as to synthesize the sounds of cars and the sounds of horns. And the record actually starts off with somebody entering a car and turning it on and shutting the door. So when I say that this record takes you on a journey, it most certainly does. And again, it's Craftwork's first trip into really creating a totally synthesized project using synthesizers, mini Moogs, ARPs, and other devices too. Now Craftwork even built some of their own instruments, which I think is notable. We should discuss that because a lot of us today are not doing that. We have such easy access to so many great and wonderful affordable instruments. But in 1974, if you wanted a certain sound and it didn't exist, you had to find a way to get there. And that's what Craftwork would do in conjunction with Connie Plank, the legendary producer and engineer who worked on multiple records from Craftwork and Can and, oh my God, Harmonium, and even like American rap gods Houdini. Like Connie Plank had his hands in everything. And he was such an instrumental part in this, in that Connie was always wanting to explore different sounds and textures in the studio, and he helped Craftwork achieve a lot of that. It was the perfect pairing, if you will. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Connie Plank, there is a fantastic documentary that was on Amazon for quite some time, and it discusses Connie Plank and his journey in creating his own studio in Cologne and recording all these bands. You should also explore Craftwork's, future records, Radioactive, The Man Machine. There are so many, and if you have a chance to see them live today, which they are still performing, albeit only with one original member, you should get out and do it. It's a 3D affair. They pass out glasses, and everything is arranged in real time, as well as all the videography that you see. The 3D videography is actually happening in real time as well. So it's a really, really cool experience, and you get to say that you saw Craftwork. So check out Craftwork. They have influenced virtually everybody, from 1974 moving forward. So that's my top 5. I know it's not going to be your top 5. And one other thing I wanted to mention too is, in dealing with all 5 of those records, we're working totally in the analog domain, right? There are no ones and zeros being transferred. Everything that's happening is electrons, electricity being manipulated, all the way down to the tape machine where we're actually manipulating particles of magnetic oxide to record this content. We couldn't split regions or clips and do region gain or clip gain and butt things together. Like if you wanted to edit, you had to edit tape and you had to cut it and tape it together with another piece of tape. And if you screwed that edit up, well, there's a good chance that you just screwed up the master recording. Like there was some real art that went into this. And I'm not trying to discount everybody that's working in the digital domain. I'm just trying to let you know, and I think most of you probably realize this, and if you don't, take a step back, that you got it really, really easy. Because back in the day, it was really, really hard. These were labors of love to get this stuff to tape, especially when it had never been done before. These are people that broke ground for all of us and influenced everybody from David Bowie, Brian Eno, to Daft Punk and Bicep, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Cool? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, and I want to know what electronic records have influenced you. Please let me know in the comments below. Again, let's keep the conversation civil. Let's be friendly with each other. Nobody is right, nobody is wrong. We're just sharing opinions and our love of music, the historical context that it's been placed in. And I want to continue doing this. It's fun. I love doing this. I love talking about music because I have this massive record collection. I've been studying all this stuff my whole life. I'll quit flapping my gums now. Once again, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. We also have our accordion channel, piano channel, guitar channel, bass channel. And if you have a little extra time, you can find me at civilianaudio.com. I master records, I engineer records all over, everywhere. It's what I love to do. And let's just keep the conversation flowing. Let's be kind to each other. Don't get sick, my God, what a bummer. And I think that's it for this one. Until next time, I'm Chris Cline, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.